child is completely embedded in the family, right? It's subject. The family is me. There's no separation. The family's not it, right? The family's me. And there comes this crazy point, and any of you who have children have experienced it, and you probably remember this from your own life. There comes this point where suddenly the family somehow becomes it, right? The parents become it. Your 14-year-old does not stand next to you in the street anymore. If you'll notice that they used to stand right by you, and now you notice they're standing like 8 feet away. And you think like, what is that? Well, suddenly you've become an object, right? They're now able to see you separate. And not as me, but actually separate. And because of that, they can criticize you. They can have the things they like and the things they don't like and what they'd like to see different. And then if they keep developing, what happens is they reintegrate the family as me, but now with that additional ability to separate, so that there's a flexibility, that you're no longer just embedded. And you'll see that people get delayed in development when they either don't separate, it never happens, and they're never able to experience themselves as free and autonomous apart from the family, or they develop and never reintegrate. And one of the things that Mark was talking about last night, that integral theory really helps us with, and one of the reasons we can consider it a compassionate vehicle, is it gives us a way to reintegrate all the phases of our life. We can find a way to have everything fit, so we can be both at one with it and differentiate what doesn't work for us. So how many of you know of people, and it doesn't have to be you, who are alienated from the religion they were brought up in? It's a really common thing, right? Because what happens is we grow up embedded, we start to feel really, really uncomfortable, which is a sign of development, right? Remember the point Mark was making last night about in order to grow, we have to be uncomfortable. We're made uncomfortable, we separate, and then we're not really able to reintegrate, right? But somehow the reintegration doesn't happen. What we're trying to help show people is that you don't necessarily have to go back and fit in the way that you did before or in the way that you're expected to, but there is a possibility of reintegrating the experience, the teachings, the best part of them without being completely embedded again. Does everybody hear that? So that's one way in which learning and evolution is described. That the subject becomes an object, the object's reintegrated as subject, but then you're free to differentiate. So that's healthy evolution. So learning occurs in the same way. When we take our experience of last night, when we were in it, right, and now we think back on it, it becomes an object, and we think about, or we recollect, what is it we remember, and we reflect and we turn it, we're actually involved in the process of learning. And one of the reasons that meditation is considered to be one of the very few processes that really supports spiritual development is because that's exactly what meditation is that you sit, and the content of your awareness, you actually look at it separate from yourself, and you start to see that there's a whole field of awareness behind the object, and suddenly you are not the content of your discursive mind, but your discursive mind is what it is, and you're free to use it in whatever way is appropriate. So all the studies seem to point out that meditation actually supports vertical development. And we'll talk more about vertical development sometime this morning. So that's another reason why we're just going to take a moment to reflect on last night, because it'll actually enhance your learning a little bit. Does that make sense to everybody? It's an important little piece of integral theory, this notion about learning and evolution. Another thing that comes up quite a bit is that most people were all active learners until about age 26. And then for whatever reason, boom, learning falls off. We find a comfort zone, we find a belief system, we find a style of living, and we stay in that. And it usually is only, there are exceptions to that. There are people who continuously learn, but nobody really knows why. Like why we learn and why we don't is a little bit of a big question mark. But the fact that after we plateau, that a divorce, a trauma, an enormous change in your life will often jumpstart your learning again. And sometimes spiritual openings happen precisely because there's some big struggle or some crisis that occurs, and then boom, you're off and running again. And sometimes that doesn't occur until you get to be in your 60s and you're starting to face your mortality. So that's just another thing we could think about. So can we start with you?
Sure.
So just,
can I ask a quick question about that? When you say learning stops in your mid-20s, are you talking about a specific realm?
Yeah, I'm talking mostly about the realm of kind of beliefs and values.
Okay.
Levels of consciousness.
What?
Levels
of consciousness. Yeah, which we haven't really talked about, but we will later this morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just tell us A, how you are, and then B, just a memory or a recollection from last night that you could reflect on that would help bring you back to our experience a little bit.
Before Dan starts, is that okay, Dan?
Sure.
Just jump into maybe just one more sentence.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to make transparent something that we're doing, all ideas, evolve. So integral theory, which has 10 different people involved in it in the world in different ways. McIntosh has a book on integral theory, is a great book, and Ken's obviously very central to it, and Aurobindo earlier. This thing called integral theory, right, is evolving itself. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we're doing is, we talked yesterday, I actually had a long conversation with Rob about this particular point recently, right, is that Dan and I are trying to do is actually to evolve integral theory. So one of the things that's happening this weekend is, and again, to be transparent, as we said we would be last night, we're trying to evolve integral theory. And one of the ways we're trying to evolve it is into a compassionate vehicle. It's a phrase that Dan kind of used in passing, and I want to pick up on that. That you'll feel something happening here. And you say, that's integral? Wow, that's kind of cool. Right? And as we're trying to evolve it into a compassionate vehicle. Right? And the way evolution always works is, it's what do you pick up on? What do you feel? What do you feel into? How do you kind of like, and then things begin to happen. And what will happen is, God willing, God willing, whether that's the energy of the universe for you, whether that's the personal God, or that's your atheistic conception of all human potential, whatever that word means for you, universe willing, in 25 years from now, we won't recognize integral theory. Right? And the good news would be if Aurobindo came along, or we came along in 25 years, and this has been evolved. Right? It's very, nothing becomes static. And really the real intention is to evolve this into a compassionate vehicle that holds autonomy and communion together. And so we made, a particular point last night in passing, which we realized afterwards, which was very, very important in the way at this stages in our lives we want to teach is that everything's transparent. Meaning that we make moves, we actually do them wholeheartedly, then we say what we're doing. Right? So it creates a very, very powerful container. And where on the one hand, autonomy is radically affirmed, and no one's making a move on you. On the other hand, you're not in that kind of desiccated academic thing where you actually allow yourself to make the move. You actually do it, we actually do it together. We actually go around, we actually hold the energy of names, then we say what we're doing. Right? And so therefore, everyone's an equal partner, right, in the room. And it's a new form of teaching. It's a new form of teaching. And this teaching can be powerful, right? It can be energetic, right? It can be kind of compelling and not coercive. Right? And not manipulative. Right? In other words, we can actually hold those two things together. Right? Where everything's transparent, and yet we're really doing something together. And that by itself, I don't know how many of you are familiar with theories of education, but this is the big conundrum, today. How do you actually do teaching that's, beautiful and powerful, and yet not have it be, kind of overpowering in a sense where a person feels like somehow like I really got it, it was really beautiful, but I've got this uncomfortable feeling because I lost my autonomy someplace along the way, right? And and you've got that uncomfortable feeling afterwards, and you're not quite sure where it came from. And so what's happening here is we're really trying to bring something very, very subtle in the evolution of both integral theory and within it of what teaching might be able to be. Okay.
Okay, I want to add on to that, which is that I really support what you're saying about the autonomy of your learning, and I would say for me that to the extent that I'm able to make transparent what's happening, I will. But there are I'm making all kinds of subtle decisions all the time about what I'm doing, and particularly this morning when I'm going to facilitate Big Mind, that won't be transparent because they're not even conscious to me. And if they're not conscious to me, I certainly can't make them conscious to you. So let's just say we're in a shared space of transparency and privacy, and we're doing our best to make sure that you are included in how we're learning together. So, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I'm feeling really excited and curious to see what the day has to bring. It's really